The boardroom pulsed with tension. On the giant screen, endless lines of code flickered, an indecipherable riddle left behind by a hacker who had breached the company's secure network. Dozens of top engineers stared, baffled, their confidence draining with every failed attempt to break it. Millions of dollars and the company's reputation hung in the balance. At the edge of the room, almost invisible, Samuel Reed pushed his mop bucket along the polished floor. The old janitor had been asked to clean quietly while the real minds worked. He listened as the CEO barked orders, as the programmers muttered excuses, as investors exchanged worried glances. They mocked Samuel under their breath. What could a man with gray hair and a mop possibly understand about code? And yet, while they panicked, Samuel's sharp eyes studied the screen. To him, the hacker's cipher wasn't chaos. It was familiar. Patterns leapt out like words on a page. What no one realized was that the solution they desperately sought was already walking among them, wearing a faded uniform and pushing a broom. And soon, the man they dismissed as a relic would unravel the code in seconds, leaving the experts stunned. The boardroom gleamed with the sterile brilliance of money and ambition. Long glass walls looked out over the city skyline, while sleek chairs encircled a table large enough to host a banquet. At its head sat Mr. Dalton, the CEO, his expensive suit sharp enough to cut. He thrived in rooms like this, places where power was currency and respect was demanded, never earned. On the massive screen at the front, the hacker's code scrolled like a waterfall of chaos. Lines of symbols, numbers, and encrypted sequences layered upon each other in ways that even seasoned programmers found dizzying. For hours, the team of young engineers had been attempting to decipher it. Each failed attempt grew the knot of tension in the room tighter. Investors shifted in their seats, some whispering about withdrawing their money if the breach wasn't resolved. The company's empire was hanging by a thread. Dalton slammed his fist on the table. "You're telling me not one of you can crack this? I pay you 6 figures to sit there and stare at gibberish?" The programmers squirmed. One, barely out of college, tried to defend himself. "Sir, this code, it's not ordinary. It's a polymorphic cipher, constantly changing structure. Every time we think we've mapped it, it rewrites itself. Whoever built this knew exactly how to stay 10 steps ahead." Dalton's lip curled. "Excuses. That's all I hear." He turned his glare on the janitor. Samuel was quietly mopping near the door, his back slightly bent but his movements deliberate, steady. Dalton sneered. "Look at him. Old man's doing more work with that mop than you are with your laptops." The room erupted in laughter. The young programmers chuckled nervously, eager to stay on Dalton's good side. Samuel kept his head down, pretending not to hear. It wasn't the first time he'd been mocked. The sting had dulled over the years, but the cruelty was always sharp. He focused on the rhythm of the mop, letting the sound of laughter roll off him like water off stone. One of the programmers added, "Careful, boss. Maybe he'll be the one to solve it." Imagine that, janitor saves the company. The laughter grew louder, crueler. Dalton smirked, pleased with the humiliation he had orchestrated. "Yeah," Dalton said. "Maybe we should let him take a crack at it." "Hey, old man, you know anything about cryptography?" His voice dripped with sarcasm. Samuel paused just long enough for a flicker of memory to flash in his mind, the endless nights of his youth spent solving puzzles, decrypting wartime codes, working with numbers until dawn. But he lowered his gaze again. "Just here to clean, sir," he murmured, his voice soft but steady. The room howled with laughter again. Dalton leaned back, triumphant, convinced he had proven his point. Brains belonged to the young and powerful, not to relics with gray hair and calloused hands. But as the ridicule carried on, Samuel's eyes drifted to the screen. The chaos of the hacker's cipher wasn't chaos at all. He could see the threads, the repeating intervals, the subtle rhythm hidden beneath the noise. It wasn't random. It was elegant. Familiar. Still, he said nothing. Years of invisibility had taught him restraint. No one here wanted to hear from a janitor. And yet, in the silence of his mind, he was already unraveling the pattern. Meanwhile, Dalton's rage boiled hotter. He berated his programmers, calling them children with toys, humiliating them in front of the investors. The young men and women flushed red, their confidence crumbling. Investors muttered louder now, words like liability, risk, and pulling out. The weight of impending collapse pressed against the room like a storm cloud. Finally, one of the programmers snapped. "Sir, unless we bring in outside experts, this could take weeks. Maybe months." This hacker knew exactly how to build an unbreakable cipher. Dalton's face darkened. Unbreakable? Nothing is unbreakable. If we fail here, it will ruin us. Do you understand? He pointed to the screen. That code is a ticking bomb. If we don't solve it, we lose everything. Silence followed. No one dared to speak. The air was suffocating. Dalton's eyes found Samuel again. He gestured dismissively with his hand. Even the janitor probably sees how pathetic this is. What do you think, Reed? Can your mop fix my company? More laughter. Even some of the investors chuckled now, enjoying the cruelty. Samuel stopped his mop, lifted his gaze briefly, and met Dalton's eyes. For the first time that night, there was no submission in his expression, only calm, quiet resolve. But he said nothing. The moment stretched, then broke as Samuel returned to his work. The humiliation was complete. Samuel had been reduced to a punchline in a room full of arrogance. The young engineers stared at him with condescension. Dalton leaned back, confident he had reasserted his dominance. The investors whispered, shaking their heads, convinced the company's brightest minds had failed. But beneath the polished floor, beneath the mop strokes, Samuel's mind was already working faster than the most advanced algorithm. The code wasn't unbreakable. It was a puzzle. And puzzles were what he lived for. By the end of the night, when the challenge of deciphering the impossible code would hang heavier than ever, Samuel Reed, the old janitor they mocked, would be the only one capable of solving it in seconds. You've seen how Samuel, the quiet janitor, has been ridiculed and dismissed, even as chaos unfolds around the so-called experts. But sometimes, the people you overlook are the ones holding the answers. And if you're enjoying this story, if you believe in unexpected heroes and moments where the underestimated rise, then now's the time to join us. Hit subscribe, be part of this community, and never miss a story that proves brilliance can come from the most unlikely places. The silence in the boardroom was suffocating. Executives shifted nervously in their seats, eyes darting between the locked code on the screen and the investors growing impatient by the second. The lead engineer sighed loudly, throwing his hands in the air. It's impossible. This isn't standard encryption. Whoever did this, they're playing a game we don't know how to win. Snickers rippled around the room as one of the younger programmers muttered, "Guess we'll be here all night while the janitor polishes the floors." A few others laughed, bitter, anxious laughter that hid their fear. Samuel bent down, wringing his mop, his expression unreadable. Finally, the CEO slammed a fist on the table. "We're done. We're finished if we don't get this system back online. Millions are at stake. Someone must have a solution." Samuel straightened slowly, the mop handle in his hand like a walking stick. His voice was calm, gravelly from age. "It's not impossible. It's substitutional. Old-school cryptography hidden inside modern noise. Whoever wrote this wanted to be clever, but not clever enough." The room froze. Dozens of eyes blinked at him, stunned into silence. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then came the scoffing. "You," laughed the lead engineer, shaking his head. "You clean floors for a living, old man. Don't embarrass yourself." Another programmer chimed in with a smirk. "What's next? You'll tell us you're a retired spy." Samuel walked forward, each step deliberate, until he stood just a few feet from the glowing wall of encrypted code. His eyes narrowed, tracing the sequences, the rhythm, the repetition. His voice was steady. "You've been looking at it as if it's software. But it's a language. See this?" He pointed at a recurring string of characters. It's the anchor. Classic Latin square encryption. Murmurs spread across the room. One of the older investors leaned forward, intrigued. Latin squares? That's from mid-century code breaking, isn't it? Samuel gave the faintest smile. Earlier. Much earlier. The engineers scoffed again, but their laughter rang hollow this time. One of them whispered, "How would he know that?" The CEO, desperate, gestured toward the screen. "Fine. If you think you can do better, prove it. You have 5 minutes before we call the press and admit we've lost." Samuel's hands hovered over the keyboard, gnarled with age yet steady. He began typing, not frantic like the programmers before him, but smooth, methodical, like a pianist playing from memory. With each keystroke, characters aligned, patterns unfolded, nonsense transformed into meaning. At first, the programmers chuckled, rolling their eyes. But then the laughter faded. Lines of decrypted text began appearing across the screen, clean, coherent, unmistakably correct. A gasp filled the room. "No way," whispered one of the younger engineers. The older investor's jaw dropped. He's actually breaking it." Samuel didn't look away from the code. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. "When you've spent a lifetime solving puzzles no one else could, this is child's play." The room leaned in closer, captivated. The janitor they had mocked, the man they had ignored for years, was doing in seconds what their finest minds couldn't achieve in hours. And he wasn't even breaking a sweat. The room grew hushed, save for the rhythmic tapping of Samuel's fingers on the keys. The glowing screen reflected off his glasses, illuminating the calm determination etched on his face. Every keystroke felt like a hammer blow to the arrogance of those who had mocked him. One of the programmers stammered, but how are you doing that? That isn't in any manual, any system we've seen." Samuel didn't look up. "That's because you've been trained to think in shortcuts, in frameworks, and what's new. But codes don't start with computers. They start with people. And people repeat themselves." His wrinkled finger pointed to a section of the decrypted message. "See? The hacker reused a classic Caesar shift before embedding it in modern wrappers. That's the tell." The CEO leaned forward, barely breathing. Investors hovered on the edge of their seats. Each new line of plain text spilling onto the screen was like a miracle unfolding. Where the programmers had seen chaos, Samuel revealed symmetry, purpose, and ultimately, truth. A young engineer finally whispered what everyone was thinking, he's a genius. But Samuel shook his head. "Not genius. Just practice. A long time ago, I cracked codes for reasons I'd rather forget. Now I mop floors to keep busy. But a puzzle is still a puzzle." Suddenly, the final barrier collapsed. The last encrypted block dissolved into English, revealing the hacker's message, a blueprint of the breach, names, locations, even the method of the attack. Everything they needed to shut it down, stop the losses, and recover the company's reputation. The room erupted in gasps. The CEO shot to his feet. You did it." His voice was half shock, half awe. He turned to the stunned engineers. "He decrypted in minutes what you couldn't solve in hours." The programmers shifted uncomfortably, their arrogance crumbling. The lead engineer, who had mocked Samuel most, muttered, I didn't even see the pattern." Samuel leaned back, cracking his knuckles. "That's because you weren't looking. You were too busy proving how smart you were." The crowd of investors broke into whispers. One older man, his voice filled with respect, declared, "This is beyond remarkable. He's not just good, he's exceptional. What you have here isn't a janitor. You have a master codebreaker." The CEO nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Samuel. "And to think, we almost lost everything because we didn't listen. Because we assumed." Samuel finally stood, pushing the chair back. "Assumptions blind you. Always have. Always will." He picked up his mop handle, as if the breathtaking feat he had just performed was no more than another chore on his list. The silence that followed wasn't disbelief anymore. It was reverence. The man they had dismissed had become the savior of the moment, his brilliance undeniable. And though they gawked and whispered, Samuel simply returned to his bucket, rolling it toward the door. He hadn't come for applause. He hadn't come for glory. He came because a puzzle needed solving, and that was enough. The boardroom was no longer buzzing with panic. Instead, it thrummed with a different energy, shame, awe, and an uneasy silence that pressed down on every executive and programmer present. Samuel, mop in hand, quietly wheeled his bucket toward the corner as if nothing monumental had just happened. But no one could tear their eyes away from him. The CEO broke the silence first. "Ladies and gentlemen, this man has done what none of us could." His voice trembled with both relief and humility. "He decrypted the code, saved our systems, and protected our reputation. While we were too blind to see past appearances, Samuel reminded us what true expertise looks like." The programmers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding Samuel's gaze. The lead engineer, the loudest critic, finally stood. His arrogance had dissolved into something closer to regret. "I was wrong," he admitted, though the words seemed to burn on his tongue. "I mocked you. I treated you like you were beneath me. And you saved us all." Samuel looked at him calmly, his expression unreadable. "You don't need to apologize to me. You need to ask yourself why you couldn't see past the mop." The remark hung in the air like a hammer strike. Heads lowered. Not one of them could meet his eyes. Justice came not from Samuel's anger, but from their own realization. The engineers who once laughed were now drowning in shame. Their reputations, built on pride and superiority, were shattered by the very man they dismissed. Word of the incident would spread, investors would talk. The arrogance of the elite had been exposed, and each antagonist felt the sting of it. As the CEO praised Samuel, the investors crowded around him. One extended his hand. "You've saved us millions, maybe more. You could name your price here, salary, position, whatever you wish." Samuel looked at the hand, then shook his head slowly. "I don't want your money. I don't want your titles. I came here to clean floors. That's my work. But when something broken crosses my path, I fix it. That's who I am." The investors looked stunned. The CEO tried again. "At least let us give you recognition. Your story deserves to be told." But Samuel was already turning away, mop in hand, his voice low and resolute. "Stories don't make me who I am. I know my worth. That's enough." He walked past the stunned crowd, pushing his bucket steadily down the polished hallway, his figure shrinking with each step until he was just a shadow at the end of the corridor. The echo of his departure was louder than any applause could have been. In the days that followed, justice settled into place. The arrogant programmers were quietly sidelined, their inflated reputations punctured by the memory of the night they had been bested by the janitor. Some left the company altogether, unable to withstand the humiliation. Others stayed, working more quietly, stripped of their bravado. The CEO, humbled by the ordeal, made changes. He instituted new policies that valued every employee's input, regardless of title. "No more blindness," he said in a meeting. "Respect will guide us moving forward." And though Samuel never asked for it, his name became whispered in reverence through the halls. Employees who once passed him without a glance now greeted him with quiet respect, a nod, or even a thank you. As for Samuel, he continued his quiet routines, mopping the floors, emptying the bins, keeping the building spotless. Yet those who paid attention noticed something different. He wasn't just the janitor anymore. He was the man who had saved them, who had reminded them of humility and perspective. He never flaunted it, never brought it up. He lived as he always had, authentic, grounded, unshaken by the praise or by the scorn. His value had never depended on their recognition, and it never would. For Samuel, justice wasn't about watching his mockers fall. It was about walking away whole, unbothered, and true to himself. And in that quiet, dignified exit, he had won far more than glory. He had one piece. Samuel's story is more than just about cracking a code. It's about how often we underestimate the quiet, the unseen, the overlooked. In a world obsessed with titles and appearances, he reminded everyone that true brilliance can come dressed in work boots and a faded uniform. His humility was his power, and his refusal to seek validation was his triumph. And now, I want to turn this back to you. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever surprised others, or yourself, by showing what you're really capable of? Share your story in the comments below. Let's make this space a community where the unseen and underestimated can finally shine. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to hit subscribe. Join us as we continue to tell tales of resilience, humility, and unexpected greatness. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room holds the loudest victory.